previously on the Backroad Horror Show. David breaks down into tears and hysteria as he stares at Penelope's lifeless corpse. Penelope and David would have been married 3 years in just a couple of months. Memories of their lives together start flooding through him. He is beyond devastated. He takes Penelope in his arms and gingerly places her body on the ground beside the SUV. David tenderly grabs her hands, places a kiss on her forehead, and sobs uncontrollably in the middle of the road. The combination of shock and blood loss leaves David in a dire strait. He collapses next to Penelope. His head rests on top of Penelope's stomach. He looks at her one more time before he blacks out and passionately says,
"I love you, Penelope."
Meanwhile, in the back of the SUV, Glenn and Sherry are still unconscious. They are unaware of the situation that has occurred to David and Penelope. Sherry reaches her right arm over to Glenn to try and wake him up, but once she does, a sharp pain shoots through her and she lets out an audible cry and gasps. Sherry yells at Glenn,
"Glenn, honey, are you okay? You need to wake up."
Glenn finally stirs awake and lets out a sharp gasp and moans in pain around his head and right shoulder. Glenn looks around the SUV, which is almost unrecognizable now. They are stunned at looking at the crash area. Sherry and Glenn start to call out David and Penelope's names. They look down the road in front and behind them.
David!
David!
Penelope!
Penelope!
Hey!
Are you guys okay? Where
Are you?
They turn around and go around to the passenger side of the vehicle, and what they are about to witness is easily the most traumatic experience of their lives. Glenn is the first to see, and he is speechless at what he finds.
Sherry, they're over here! On the road! Oh, no! Oh my God! Please! No, they can't be! Sherry!
They are grief-stricken by the loss of Penelope, and while they mourn over her, all hope is not lost just yet. Sherry kisses her friend's hands, but while doing so, she asks Glenn to check David. Senses something. His eyes light up. Glenn yells to Sherry,
I got a pulse! I got a pulse, Sherry!
Glenn and Sherry go inside the back of the SUV and find an emergency roadside kit with first aid. They grab the gauze, bandages, and rubbing alcohol to help stop the bleeding from the lacerations on David's forehead and left forearm. Sherry applies the rubbing alcohol and Glenn wraps the gauze and bandages. Out of the corner of their eyes, they see a reflection coming from the west side of the roadway. That's where they were coming from. They don't know exactly what it could be as they squint to try and make out what it is. Glenn opens his phone and uses the SOS app installed and points the flash towards the reflection. As soon as it completes the first set of SOS, the reflection they see immediately goes away. Glenn is confused by what he just saw. He walks over to Sherry and says,
It's gone! It just disappeared!
Sherry has a concerned look on her face and in an epiphany recalls something that Penelope says just before the crash.
David, what is that? Watch out!
Glenn and Sherry's expression grows cold and a sense of terror fills the air.
What could have been out here to make all this happen?
I don't know, but we need to get out of here.
Now!
Sherry then hears a rustling by the tree line. Both of them freeze in place. They listen attentively for a few seconds. The only thing they manage to hear is crickets chirping and frogs croaking. They bend down to try and carefully try to pick up David and put him into the back of the SUV. Then, a loud noise comes out from the field opposite of the tree line, which Sherry jumps at the noise.
Glenn, what was that?
And now back to part 3 of the Backroad Horror Show. Here on Short Stories. Glenn nervously looks around and tells Sherry,
Get David in the SUV! I'm going to investigate what that was.
Sherry's eyes go wide.
Are you crazy? We have no idea what that possibly was. And you want to look?
Glenn tells her,
Whatever that fucking thing is, it already is responsible for killing Penelope, and it almost killed David. I'm not gonna lose any more of my family tonight.
Sherry reluctantly agrees with Glenn and says,
Okay, fine. if you want to look, but before you go, take this.
Sherry hands Glenn 3 road flares.
If you see anything, put up the flare, and I'll come running after I manage to put David into the SUV.
Glenn nods and gives Sherry a hug and kiss.
I'll be right back, I promise.
Glenn then walks out into the tree line with his flashlight on his phone. She watches the light fade as he walks farther and farther out, eventually seeing the glow of the flashlight being taken back over by the blackness of night. Sherry kneels down by David, anxiously waiting for Glenn to return. She knows she can't leave David out here like this and looks for something to help her get David up and into the SUV. Sherry looks around at the wreckage and nothing immediately comes to mind. She paces around the SUV looking over and over for something. Eventually, Sherry throws up her hands in defiance.
Okay, fine. I'll do it my damn self.
She gets into position and kneels down next to David. With all her strength, she lifts David up to his feet and puts his arm around her left shoulder. Sherry drags David inch by inch to the driver's side back and opens the door and carefully hoists David into the seat. She is exhausted and her right arm is throbbing in pain. Sherry then tells David,
Yeah, that's right, I did it. I'm always picking you back up together again.
Suddenly, David replies back,
I'm not always in this bad a shape either.
Sherry hears her brother speak and she whips around towards her brother and cries openly. David and Sherry hug gingerly and are elated to both see each other. David looks at his sister in delight, seeing that she's okay. He looks around a bit. His expression goes from warmth and elation to emptiness and despair. He tells her,
If only I could have kept control of the SUV, Sherry, she'd still be here. I'm sorry, sis. I tried to help her, but I was too late.
Sherry tells David,
Look, there was nothing you could have done.
David and Sherry stay silent for a bit and then he asks where Glenn is. Sherry begins to tell David what happened and then a deafening roar envelops the two. Shortly after, a road flare gets shot into the air, followed by something trudging from the tree line. Sherry and David look very concerned. Sherry tells David,
I'm gonna shut the door so nothing can get you.
David nods and lies down as he's in excruciating pain still. Sherry stays on the opposite side of the rustling that continues to race towards them. She finally makes out a faint glow of light that is coming through and it gets brighter and brighter. Sherry is delighted to see the flashlight coming towards her. It must be Glenn. She cries out,
Glenn, what did you find?
There is no response. Sherry yells again.
Glenn, is that you? Answer me, what did you find?
Glenn comes out of the tree line and falls down on the road. Sherry runs over to him. Glenn is panting and is covered in blood, dirt, and leaves. Glenn in a hurried tone tells her,
We need to leave now. That thing isn't like any animal I've ever seen.
Sherry's expression goes from curiosity to fright. Sherry picks up Glenn off the road and they barrel into the front side of the SUV. David responds within pain.
Hey man, what did you find?
Glenn looks back at David and smiles.
Oh shit, dude, you're awake.
David and Glenn do their bro handshake and Glenn tells them both what happened. Glenn walks through the tree line about a quarter mile before making it into a field. He sees a silhouette of what looks like a deer or something. He looks around and lights a flare.
However, the flash spooks the animal and makes an audible roar and runs towards him. Glenn at the last second jumps out of the way and the red glow from the flare illuminates the animal's face. It has big gnarly-looking teeth, a long snout and short hair. It isn't any bigger than a deer. Glenn finds a rock and lights another flare, watching the animal circle him in the field. The animal gnashes its teeth and charges at Glenn again. This time Glenn is prepared. There is a soft spot in the soil and Glenn positions himself in front of it. The animal then runs and flashes its teeth before lunging at him. Glenn dives underneath the animal and shoots the flare beneath the creature. The animal's fur is set on fire and runs into a fallen tree by the tree line. That's what made the deafening noise Sherry and David heard. It roared in agony. Glenn then runs over and starts smashing a rock against the face of the animal. He is screaming and yelling before the animal gets up and swipes at Glenn's arm inside. It is a glancing blow but makes Glenn start bleeding. The creature runs off into the field away from Glenn and he shoots up the last flare, allowing Sherry to see it.
Glenn tells them that's how it went down, and they are awestruck at what he tells them. Sherry and David say,
Are you sure it wasn't like anything you ever saw?
Glenn tells them,
Trust me, guys, it's an alien kind of creature. It looked like a demon and a dog, and as big as a deer. It looked like it was from hell.
They are talking amongst themselves before they see a glow coming from behind them. They all look, and this time it isn't any mistaking it. It's another vehicle. Sherry and Glenn jump out of the SUV. They wave their hands up and start shouting,
Help us!
Help us!
Please!
We need help!
The vehicle stops on the shoulder behind the SUV. The man gets out and goes.
What in the world happened here?
Sherry and Glenn both tell them who they are and say,
Mister, we were in a bad accident. My best friend was killed, and my brother was hurt badly.
The man looks at the wreckage and sees all the pieces littered on the road. He then looks in the middle and sees something underneath the emergency blanket. He takes off his hat and then asks,
What is under there?
Sherry tells him in a somber and tearful manner.
That used to be my best friend.
Sherry is trying to keep her composure when Glenn runs over to Sherry to console her and says,
Her brother is in the back and needs medical attention now. Can you please help us?
The man is shocked by all the devastation around them and can't deny them. He says,
I'll dial 911 from my satellite phone and get you all to the hospital. You guys just sit tight.
In a cruel twist of fate, as the man walks to his vehicle, the creature comes out from the tree line and lunges at him. The sheer force of the creature impacting the man against his vehicle immediately severs his spinal cord and he falls to the ground dead. Yeah, I say he did. Glenn and Sherry watch it all from a few feet away and they gasp in horror as the Good Samaritan dies right in front of them. The creature turns and snarls at them. It roars at them, creeping up. Glenn and Sherry are hand in hand and they stare down at the creature. David peeks out from the back of the SUV and is shocked by what he is looking upon. He tries to think of something, anything. He recalls back to when Penelope was after the accident. The feeling of being helpless. He has a sudden rush of adrenaline and he opens the door to the back of the SUV. He tells Glenn and Sherry,
Get the fuck in here now!
Glenn and Sherry hop into the back liftgate of the SUV before David presses the button to shut it. The creature snaps at the back, but can't figure out how to get them. The creature walks slowly up and down and around the SUV. It sniffs the air before running off into the tree line. Sherry, Glenn, and David scan the area before they start talking again. They both talk about how much power that creature has, and they look back to the man who was going to help them. They shake their heads in sorrow. Glenn tells them both,
We need to leave this fucking area now. Grab Penelope's body and let's go.
David and Sherry look at him. David is the first to respond with,
Dude, we have to be careful. That fucking thing just came out of nowhere and just killed him that fast.
Sherry says,
We have to create a diversion. It's probably still out there just waiting. We need to be quiet while we rush to grab Penelope.
David tells them,
Penelope was my wife. I'll get her. Just cover for me.
Sherry and Glenn look at each other.
David, you can barely walk. How are you going to get Penelope and get her into the vehicle by yourself?
David in anger tells them,
It is my fault that we're all in this situation. I lost my wife. I will not put anyone else's lives in danger for my fuck up.
Sherry tries to interject her brother, but David demands that
I can't lose anyone else. I will do this. I owe it to her to try.
Glenn grabs David by the neck. He tells him,
I got your back, bro. Just tell us what you want to do.
Sherry is flabbergasted.
Glenn, you can't be serious. He needs us.
Glenn tells her,
Honey, we need to do this now. We are wasting time. It's now or never, babe.
Sherry shakes her head.
Okay, fine. How are we gonna do this?
Glenn hatches an idea.
This is how it's gonna work. David, you are gonna honk the horn while me and Sherry hurry to the man's vehicle. Then, we are gonna put the man into the back of his truck. While you get the creature's attention, me and Sherry will drive towards you. We'll block the path and we'll start honking going down the road while you get Penelope from the road and into your SUV. If we come across the creature, we'll move it away from you before turning around and parking alongside you in the SUV. All we gotta do then is open the doors to transfer you guys into the truck and we're home free.
David and Sherry with a puzzled look say,
That's your plan?
Of all the ideas you've had,
it might actually work.
it might actually work.
The three of them all look at each other with a smile, and on the count of 3, Sherry and Glenn slowly open up the door, head out into the roadway. They are both on alert and try to be as quiet as they can. David watches them progress from the front of his SUV. David looks at the windshield and with his good arm pushes against it. It gives way and hatches a plan of his own. David carefully pushes the shards off to clear the way. He looks down at the steering column and the keys are still in it. He wonders if it will start, if David can start the vehicle and it moves when he puts it in gear. It'll buy some extra time for Glenn and Sherry if the animal comes for them. While David concocts up his plan, Glenn and Sherry approach the man's truck. It's a quad-cab Dodge Ram pickup with a 6-foot bed. They crouch down beside the man. Glenn turns him over and he and Sherry look at each other in a melancholy demeanor. They shake their heads and try to pick him up and into the truck. Sherry opens the tailgate before coming back to Glenn. They start to drag him to the back. Just as they pick up the man in the truck, they hear something trying to start. They carefully put the man inside the bed of the truck before looking back to the SUV where David is. David is trying to start the SUV. It cranks over and sputters, but doesn't start just yet. Back at the SUV, David tries his luck again and again. He grabs the steering wheel and then shouts out,
Come on! Fucking start, you piece of shit!
Just as David lets go of the key, the SUV sputters to life and idles. David's eyes light up and he can't believe it. It billows steam from the radiator, but it's alive. David then hits the brake and puts the SUV into drive. The engine idles down and transmission engages into drive. The SUV shudders but miraculously starts moving. He revs the SUV and moves it about 50 feet back onto the road in the opposite direction. He watches Glenn and Sherry get into the man's truck and they creep towards David. David puts the SUV into park and gets out. Glenn and Sherry tell him,
Come on! Let's get out of here before that thing comes out again!
Glenn parks the truck to the back of David's SUV. They watch David get out and gingerly walk over to Penelope's body. He kneels down one last time at Penelope and grabs the blanket off her and kisses her forehead one last time. I don't know how he does it, but David manages the strength and picks Penelope up as he struggles over back to Glenn and Sherry. Sherry opens up the door and they both carefully lay Penelope in the back seat. David cries softly before they both hear the same rustling by the tree line. Glenn and Sherry shout out,
Come on, David! Let's get the fuck out of here! It's coming!